And welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Cabinet meeting this evening on the 28th of June 2021. Before we begin the formal agenda, as this is an in-person meeting held in the Council Chamber, I'm obliged to read out the following notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, therefore, please could I ask that you make your way down the main staircase, out of the main doors of the Town Hall and congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the council will then give instructions when it is safe to re-enter the building. Before we move into the formal agenda, I'd like to remind everybody here that in order to speak, so as to make the camera pan in your general direction, you need to push the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you before you say anything. So, without further ado, let us move into the agenda itself, the first item of which is the minutes of Cabinet held on the 7th of June 2021. Are members of the Cabinet content for me to sign those minutes? Any dissent from anyone? No dissent. I will sign the minutes. The second item is apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies for absence, Executive Director?
Chair, we have 3 apologies this evening. We have apologies from Councillor O'Rourke, and in her place we have the Deputy Labour Group Leader, Councillor Brader, this evening. We have apologies from Councillor Mrs Robbins and Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. Next item is declarations of interest. So first of all, can I ask whether any members present have any non-pecuniary interest to declare as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors? I see no hands raised. And secondly, does anybody have any pecuniary interests as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors? No hands raised. And finally, does anyone have a notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992 non-payment of community charge or council tax? Again, I see no hands raised. Item number 4 is question time. Do we have any questions from the public, Executive Director?
There are no questions this evening, Chair.
Thank you very much. Item number 5 then is the adoption of the Housing Needs Supplementary Planning Document 2021, which is with you, Councillor Simpson-Vince.
Thank you, Chair. This is the Housing Needs Supplementary Planning Document, which we would ask to be sent to Council for adoption. This looks at the mechanisms for delivering affordable housing, identifying best practice in its delivery, detailing the criteria for rural exception sites, providing design guidance on specialist housing, as well as self-build and custom. It deals with policies H1 to H6 out of the local plan and policies SDC4 and SDC6, which look at carbon and water reduction and flood and drainage systems. We had 15 responses to this SPD when it went out for consultation last year, and changes were made accordingly, and I would ask that Cabinet approve this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson-Vince. Very positive. Do we have a seconder from among the Cabinet, please? Councillor Poole.
Yes, I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Roodhouse, do you wish to say anything on this?
Just a few words, if I may, on this and the next one, recognising that they're both going to full council as well. It's just really seeking assurances at this stage. Do you think that both these SPDs are as strong as they could be to help the Borough Council go forward, especially in light of all the new legislation which is coming through in relation, the other item would be air quality, but also with design standards now that are coming through as well. And certainly with, you know, the new homes and the growing older population as well at the same time. My personal view is I think we could be a lot bolder than we are in these documents and actually a lot stronger. So it puts us in a better position to negotiate around with developers at that time.
We do have a sustainable design SPD that's going to come through the system over the next few months, so hopefully we can feed more in for that. In terms of climate change, we're kind of limited to a certain extent with government legislation, so if we put things in the SPD that either contrary to the local plan or aren't legally required, then we run into issues with the developers then appealing against them. A lot of these things can be dealt with within individual planning applications, and that would be the place for a lot of these to come forward and be dealt with. So it's something we're going to keep an eye on, and we'd want to try and get as much as we can in the Sustainable Design SPD, but it will be individual planning applications as well, which hopefully will strengthen as government planning legislation changes over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson-Vince. Councillor Brader, do you wish to say anything?
Yes, please. Just one thing that we noted was to do with the viability assessment. So I see originally in the document before it went out to consultation, there was a proposal that there may be subsequent viability assessments if circumstances changed. So I kind of imagine that there would be one at the beginning in the 106 process, and then there could be further ones later on during the process. I did see that after the consultation response was received by the agents on behalf of Taylor Wimpey, they objected to that. I can well understand why developers would not be so keen to do that, but surely in terms of the checks that we need in order to achieve our goal of delivering affordable housing, it would be better to have those subsequent ones available to us further down the line.
Again, viability assessments tend to come in with the planning applications. On a major site, for example, Eden Park as an example, the last Bloor application that came through, they argued viability on that particular section of the site, and that was a site that had been going for several years. So for the big sites that go for several years, we might get that, but we can push back on that and we can ask more questions on viability assessments going forward. We're determined to get our affordable housing numbers, so developers know that, and that message is out there, and it's our policy. So it's something we're certainly going to be pushing really hard for, to make sure developers meet those numbers.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson-Vince. And then I'll put this to the vote of Cabinet now. Can all those who support this please raise their hand? And that is unanimous. Moving on then to item number 6, which is the adoption of the air quality supplementary planning document, which is again with you, Councillor Simpson-Vince.
Thank you. Yes, again, this is another one to go to Council in July. This one deals with policy HS5 and parts of SDC1 not covered by policy HS5 within the local plan. This one actually had quite a long consultation because it started its consultation on the 9th of March last year, and obviously the world changed quite quickly after that. So we kept this consultation running for much longer whilst we were sorting out all the measures for doing more online consultation types. So this one actually kept going until 20th of November last year. We received 18 responses in that time. This is predominantly for new developments, making sure new developments do not add to any air quality issues around the town. It will be looking at the air quality management areas, which were detailed in the report, with air quality assessments going forward. It also stipulates things like electric vehicle charging. So, for example, if there are 10 or more dwellings, there will be one charging point per dwelling. And for commercial properties, there will be one charging point per 10 spaces. So, for example, if you have 250 spaces, we would expect 25 charging points. And we're going to be quite firm on that. We think that going forward, that's the way to go. So we're quite happy to push on that. Yeah, this one just needs to go to full council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson-Vince. And do we have a seconder from the Cabinet, please? Thank you, Councillor Crane. It's always good to mix up the seconders on these occasions. Councillor Roodhouse, do you wish to say anything?
Just a couple of comments, if I may. It's not dissimilar to the last point, but this one is probably more important in light of the government's position and over the court case, of course, which happened some weeks ago now with the North Circular and the air quality issues there. And again, I would like to see within this that we actually can keep this document live and actually strengthen it, because air quality is going to be a key issue going forward, and therefore we'll probably have to adapt and change this document quite quickly, I think, because you know how governments act. One day they say this and then the next day they say that, and the third day you have to do this. So it is something, I think, and certainly on air quality, and if we match that with the climate change working group and the agenda that they're working to as well. So I would hope within the recommendations that go through to council that we could work in another recommendation to that, which is actually keeping this document live, so it could be amended or adapted. And of course that could be done through the planning policy working group at the same time.
Okay, I would have to check with officers the actual process for reviewing an SPD in terms of who triggers it, whether it's something, I don't know, Steph, do you know the answer to that one?
Yeah, sure, happy to advise. So with the SPD, if we were to review it, we would obviously need to undertake further public consultation. But I think it's a pertinent point that these documents are meant to be regularly refreshed. You know, that we need to make sure they're in line with national guidance and the latest thinking. So as a matter of course, we would want to do that as a borough council anyway, and keep it under regular review, particularly with the climate emergency that we've declared.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. And Councillor Brader, do you wish to say anything on this?
Yep, thanks, Chair. Just briefly, regarding the mitigation, I think it's good that we have those things in place. What we were concerned about was the cumulative impacts that sort of any new development brings. Like, for instance, quite often see quite long queues down Leicester Road to get to Elliott's Field at weekends, and more queues through the town centre when traffic's at a peak. So anything that adds to that is going to be a problem. And I just wondered, from the mitigation point of view, I think one of the things is that's what the electric vehicle charging points are there for, that will sort of mitigate that. But that seems more like a long-term mitigation, and I think that's a great ambition to have, and I absolutely support it. But do we have any idea of the amount of electric vehicles there is now and what the demand is for the charging points? Sorry.
I don't know how many electric vehicles there are in Rugby, to be honest, or how many they are. I just know, just anecdotally, for example, if you go to Tesco's where there are electric charging points, now they tend to be used, whereas 12 months ago, 15 months ago, they weren't. Every development has to mitigate its own development. So they have to deal with whatever they are creating within that development. So that would hopefully try and deal with that, and through Section 106 and any other mitigation we can put in place. But it's a bit of a moving feast at the moment with all of this. So yeah, it's something we're just going to keep an eye on as applications come through and see what we can do.
Thank you very much. So we have a proposer and a seconder. I'll now put this to a vote. Can all those members of the Cabinet in favour please raise their hands? And that is unanimous. We now move on to item number 7, which is the request for finance updating community infrastructure levy viability study, which for the final time this evening is with you, Councillor Simpson-Vince.
Thank you. This is mainly a report to note. So this is just updating the SIL study, which was last done in September 2019. The world's changed a bit since then, and so before we look at whether we need to consider SIL or whether we stick with Section 106, we need to update the report. This money's been found within existing resources, so it's not a request for further funds, it's just something for Cabinet to note.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder from among the Cabinet, please?
Yes, I'll second that again, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Poole. And Councillor Roodhouse.
The only comment on this one is, I recognise some of us will know what SIL is about, but I didn't know whether we could put a briefing together for all members around this to actually allow some of the knowledge to spread within the local authority as well, because no doubt at some stage we may have to make some choices around SIL, as other local authorities have. So I recognise it's for noting, but also I think it would be useful if we could do some briefing on it for elected members to keep, get the knowledge up.
I think once we've got the updated study, and then we've got to look at the compare and contrast with Section 106, then that would make sense at that point to do a briefing to explain pros and cons of both systems and why we would recommend whichever direction we went in.
Okay, and Councillor Brader.
Nothing really, just looking forward to it being explored. Seems an interesting idea.
Okay, so we have a proposer and a seconder. Could I ask all those members of the Cabinet in favour to raise their hand, please? And that is unanimous. Thank you. We move now on to item number 8, which is within the Leisure and Wellbeing portfolio. As the portfolio holder has sent his apologies, I will move this from the chair. This is essentially a straightforward and I think hugely positive matter. It's the adoption of the tree policy. Those who have long memories or reasonably long memories might remember the very same report came before Cabinet a few months ago, and it was decided that we wanted to undertake some further consultation before we actually went live with the policy. That consultation has now taken place, and on that basis it gives me great pleasure to recommend this report as written. Can I have a seconder from the Cabinet, please? Councillor Crane. Oh, there's a fight. Councillor Lawrence can do the next one. Thank you, Councillor Crane. Councillor Roodhouse.
The only comment around this is in light of the work that's going on, which I know the County Council Forestry are doing within Rugby Borough and elsewhere. In the action plan 1A and 2 talks about 2024. I think that could be delivered in 2023, to be honest, because I think that work is underway now and has been going on for some time. Whenever I speak to certain tree officers around, and certainly ones from the Borough Council, I know that they've been going around certain areas and been logging that in, but the forestry software for the county council. And I know that they've been logging stuff as well. So though it says 2024, I would hope that we could actually bring that forward to 2023. And certainly because we've declared a climate emergency as well, I think the faster we can move on these items, the better.
Thank you, Councillor Roodhouse. As I'm sure you're aware, whilst we have our disagreements about many matters, I think we share a commitment to the environment. And yes, I would agree with you that if any of these objectives can be delivered sooner, then that was hugely to be welcomed and should be pushed for. Councillor Brader. Oh, fine. In that case, we have a proposer and a seconder. Can I ask members of the Cabinet to indicate whether they support this, please? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. We move now on to item number 9, which is within the Finance, Performance, Legal and Governance portfolio, but in the absence of the portfolio holder, I will move from the chair. So, in summary, it's a great pleasure to move this report, which members will see does show an improvement to our financial position. Forecasting this year has obviously been extremely difficult because of the unknown nature of the recovery and the impact of the third lockdown, which was announced after the publication of the Q3 report. It should be highlighted that we have received more grant funding than we originally anticipated, and that we are in a position to move funds back into our reserves rather than drawing down on them. That said, I'm sure all members will fully recognise that there is no room for complacency here. We have only been awarded £500,000 of emergency funding for 2021-22, and there is no reason to suspect there'll be any more. And initial evidence would suggest that the current financial impact of the pandemic in 21-22 will be significantly higher than the funding granted to us. So, with a note of cautious optimism tempered with a healthy dose of realism about the challenges which lie ahead, I move the report as written. And can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Lawrence.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Roodhouse.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. One is, are we still content with all the extra resources I've got in for housing voids and the property repairs? Is that actually starting to make a difference? Because it seems to keep coming up in every report still, and the money and resources have gone into that. So I'd like some feedback on that at some stage, please. The other bit which I'd like to know a little bit more about is there's now a transformation fund 500,000, which is talked about in the report as well. And all it says is about governance structure. It doesn't tell me about how that bidding process or how that's or is it the fund for the leader and the transformation fund that he wishes to use for the council? Question. I have got a meeting set up with John Illingworth later on in this week to go through some of these details. But I would like to see some of the background to that and governance and that scrutiny and how that's going to be held to account. And then the other bit which sort of stood out really was when you look at the capital was the amount of slippage across the programme. There was lots of slippage against programmes which seemed to stand out, which again, are we content with that slippage and are we being firm enough about that? I recognise the difficulties that are there in relation to that, but it's a question which I have to present to you in relation to that. So it's about happy about the slippage. I still have concerns about housing voids and the property repairs, which keep coming up reds or ambers, and then your transformation fund. The transformation fund 500,000 and the governance.
Thank you, Councillor Roodhouse, for some interesting and lively points there, which I will deal with in the order in which you raised them. First of all, you make the point about voids, and I think it's a good one, actually. Clearly this is an issue that we've looked as a council to address as efficiently as we can, and I hope that you are reassured from other matters that have come before Cabinet and full council that this is something that we are looking at as a matter of priority, and a report will follow on how we're doing that in due course. You then referred to my transformation budget. It's not my transformation budget, Councillor Roodhouse, just because I sit in this seat. It is the transformation budget for Rugby Borough Council. It is to enable us to invest, to save, and to make some of the changes that I think we all know we probably need to make as a council. It's a modest sum for that purpose. And then finally, you asked me about the capital slippage. So yes, there has been some large-scale slippage, which it won't come as any surprise to you to learn has been significantly impacted by COVID-19. But schemes will continue to progress, and we will report progress throughout the year 2021-2022. Councillor Brader.
Thank you. Yep, just briefly. The only point I'd want to make is just to reiterate the point that you made, that there seems to be a shortfall in the funding that we've been given and the amount that we've spent during the pandemic, and hopefully we can all get to thinking about how we approach the financial situation from now and make it a priority that we don't pass off that shortfall onto our residents in terms of council tax rises or reduction in services.
Thanks, Councillor Brader. And yes, you make some good points there. The first thing to say is that we've had, as members will know, some reports of some financial reports that have been really extremely gloomy over the past few months, and this one is still fairly gloomy, but is certainly nowhere near as gloomy as perhaps once it was. So I suppose really the key message from me is that there's no room for complacency here. Things are not perhaps as serious as we thought they might have been, but there is still a job of work to do, and I think it would be foolish to pretend otherwise. What I would say is that we are committed to not cutting back on any services, and we are committed to not unfairly impacting our residents with rises in council tax. So, you know, there are some items on blue later which might address some things that we might do about that particular matter. I can probably say no more while the meeting's being publicly streamed, but you can rest assured that we are, I think, of the same mind there, Councillor Brader. Okay, well, we have a proposer and a seconder. Can I ask members of the Cabinet to indicate their support, please? That is carried unanimously. Moving on then, we have what I think might actually win an award for the most self-explanatory report ever brought to this Cabinet, which is the Calendar of Meetings 2021-2022. I had thought about preparing a 15-minute speech on this matter, but I think the report kind of speaks for itself. So I will move it as written. Councillor Paul, will you second me?
When it wants to speak, yes, I'll certainly second that, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Roodhouse? Fine. You've not got any environmental concerns or anything like that about the calendar of meetings, no? And Councillor Brader? No. In that case, can I ask members of the Cabinet to indicate whether they support with a raised hand? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone, for not making that a controversial and lengthy debate. We now move on, and then so there is an additional item which is not on the published agenda, which is with the Communities, Homes, Digital and Communications portfolio, which is the Afghan locally employed staff relocation scheme. So, Councillor Crane, would you like to introduce that for us, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is an officer report recommending that Rugby participate in the UK Afghan locally employed staff relocation scheme. That's quite a long mouthful. And that one family be accommodated in Rugby in one unit of social housing. So it's a government scheme for relocation to the UK of interpreters who served on the front line in Helmand, and in recognition for the bravery they've shown in supporting UK forces. And the government are requesting support from local authorities so they can accelerate the scheme. And so we've been asked to take part in it, and this is recommending that we do take part in it, because I think it's something that we very much ought to do. So I'd like to move the report as written.
Thank you, Councillor Crane, and I agree with you. I feel very strongly that those who've served our armed forces abroad should have this kind of support from us here in the UK, and I will proudly second that for you. Councillor Roodhouse, do you wish to say anything?
I would totally agree with that. Those that have worked for our armed forces and done the work in Afghanistan, in Helmand, we should be supporting them in this way. And I think it's the right thing to do.
Here. And Councillor Brader?
Yep, just to agree.
Excellent. Good. In that case, can I ask all those members of the Cabinet who support this to raise their hand, please? That is carried unanimously. Moving on to the item that is listed as item number 11 under the Regulation and Safety portfolio, which is the introduction of new drone technology to improve council services, which is with you, Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. The Council is always looking for innovative ways of offering better and new services. Drone technology, and specifically aerial remotely operated quadcopters, have reached a point now where they can provide positive advantages to this Council. They are already using these items in other councils, and those include surveys, monitoring fly tipping and monitoring the safety of people at gatherings. The council proposes to purchase a drone and train staff to use it. It will then be used by many services to determine the future of drones within this council. Chairman, I see this as a real advantage, but I'm also aware that people may be concerned about privacy. The council has a duty to protect privacy in where we film, how we handle data from it, and the storage and disposal of personal data. We will respect the privacy. However, we are confident that our proposed uses, including surveys of site for development, monitoring dangerous buildings where it is not safe for officers to enter, roof surveys of council properties, monitoring fly tipping, and protecting sites with unauthorised encampments will be seen by our residents as a positive move to provide better services and provide increased protection for the public. I fully support the purchase of this drone and look forward to future reports on the success of this project. I move as written.
Thank you, Councillor Poole. And Councillor Simpson-Vince, did you want to second that and maybe say something about it?
Yes, please, Chair. I asked the question of officers a few months ago of could we consider getting a drone? What was involved in it? What was the implications? Because I could see an advantage for the planning team and the development team and our enforcement team in terms of planning conditions, unauthorised developments, access to sites that sometimes because of landscape, geography or fencing, we just can't get to that easily. So I was delighted when officers came back with a full report of how we could make this work, and equally delighted at how many other services jumped in and said they could use it as well. So it looks like it will be, when we finally get one, it will be in full-time 24/7 use, I think. So yeah, absolutely support this report.
Excellent, thank you. And I believe Councillor Lawrence also wished to speak on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, one of the results of the pandemic is that for the Planning Committee, they've been unable to carry out site visits, and I see the use of a drone as being a real advantage because it means that the drone can do the site visit for the Planning Committee, and increasingly it means that the Planning Committee will be able to view the site before the meeting without having to take time off work to go out and view the site. So I see it as a real advantage for the Planning Committee going forward and thoroughly support this.
Excellent, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Roodhouse, did you wish to say anything on this one?
I recognise Councillor Lawrence's comments. I can think of certain properties where it would have been extremely useful to be used as we go through this process. The only comment around this, as would be with any drone technology or this particular stuff, I noticed on the front cover sheet it talks about the legal implications and that compliance with the CAA, Civil Aviation Authority, data protection and the other bits and pieces. Could we ensure that this is all placed publicly on the website, so if somebody out there wants to see this and about exactly what the council is doing, there is a public place they can go to and get that assurances about how it is going to be used and how it's going to be operated. Having that transparency, I think, is only fair, and I think we've got to do it because of the CAA rules and regulations anyhow, so it'd be a matter of just transposing that into a place on the website.
Thank you, Councillor Roodhouse. Yes, I can confirm that will take place, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Brader.
Yeah, just on the point about fly tipping and privacy, I think it's good that that's something that you're looking at, absolutely. The concern that I have is how the two are married together. Like, to give an example of where I live, you have a lot of urban fly tipping is in alleyways behind quite densely populated areas. So you're looking at an alleyway with a house, and how you can maintain people's privacy at the same time as enforce it. I'm not necessarily expecting an answer now, but just something to be aware of, and whether it could be used in that situation is an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Brader. I mean, I will work with the officers and we'll look into that for you and report back to you.
Thanks, Councillor Brader. And yeah, you make a very good point, and I think we all recognise the need to balance civil liberties with the need for adequate enforcement. It's something that I think we're all committed to. Can I ask all those members of the Cabinet to indicate their support for this, please? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we now have 3 items on block, the first of which is members' allowances, which I move from the chair. Will you second me, Councillor Poole?
Well, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any speakers? No? Okay, then item number 13, the Treasury Management Annual Report 2020-2021, which I move from the chair. Will you second? Thank you.
Seconded again, Chairman.
Any speakers? Okay, and then finally, item number 14, motion to exclude the public under section 100A, subsection 4, Local Government Act 1972, to consider the following resolution under section 100A, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items on the grounds they involve the likely disclosure of information defined in paragraphs 1, 2 and 3 of Schedule 12A of the Act. I propose that. Councillor Poole?
Seconded, Chairman.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. That is carried. Could we cease the live stream, please? Thank you very much. So we are now on blue, where there are 3 items, all of which sit with me for once by virtue of office rather than because I'm covering for somebody else. So first of all,